Hello from Spot Israel. And class today is basically sort of what we were saying the other day about what is the kind of mechanism. This guy told me, I remember, a very special guy, Norman Frank, told me he was once in class in university, and his professor was saying, okay, I can believe it, but tell me how. What's the mechanism? So one of the most important things about understanding life is understanding that there's some things that we can't understand. And so, for example, basically all of science, it's a big mistake to think that we actually understand. And now we know that we don't know. You can watch it happen, but you don't know how it happens. There are many things that are actually products that we use today that work on quantum physics that we know we don't know. It's literally a miracle, but yet the miracle is very consistent. And so therefore it works. So the Rebbe said, I heard this from Rabbi Khan, that a good mind understands what it doesn't understand. And that's like really the big difference between intelligence and like a child. The child only thinks that what he sees, the five senses, what he realizes in life is real. Everything besides that is kind of just in his, it's not even real. Okay, everyone has a sense that Hashem exists, because Hashem is everywhere. So like it says in Chassidus that the Creator is everywhere, so there's a sense that God is there. But to truly understand that this whole world that we're in is literally God's video game. That's the best way you can describe this reality, is that we're living in Hashem's video game. So why is that very, very important to understand? Because we were discussing yesterday this idea that you're either going to look at the world from inside out or outside in. Now, most people, even good people, scientific people that are trying to figure out truth, and even spiritual people, they're looking from the basically outside in. They're looking as we see reality, and then they're trying to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And the mistake of that is that I mentioned this professor, Dr. David Imbo, who heads this team of 1,000 theoretical physicists, and they're like the top physicists in the world. So they said that everything has a language, and the language of a galaxy, the language of the tree, the language or the way it operates, and the language of the mind are very similar. Why? Because it's based on kind of scientific principles. Even when we think, like it says, a famous example of Chassidus, you don't imagine inside your dream. Even in your dream, you can't imagine where things are crazy, but you still have the structure of time and space. You don't imagine an elephant in the eye of an eagle. You can't even imagine it. The mind literally cannot imagine things outside of its own experiences. You can imagine a spaceship, but it's an entity and it's flying, it's in time and space. You can imagine crazy things, but even then it's within the structure of time and space. You can't imagine something which is outside of the structure of time and space. And so we discussed that the closest way we can understand, and this is really in a certain sense, quantum physics and understand Hashem, but it's obviously even infinitely beyond that. But in a way, the closest way we can understand truth is more like a relationship. A relationship doesn't really exist as a thing. Things, in fact, people that unfortunately are not so spiritual, their relationships. So the idea here is that relationships are something that's not really a physical entity. Relationship is not a physical thing. It's basically two people that have a relationship. They love each other. And because they have love for each other, ironically, God forbid, the other way, there are negative relationships as well. Just like there are bonds of love, there are also bonds of hate, which is why there can be evil in this world, because hate is basically like the word for sina, hatred, and the word for kina, jealousy, are the same. Or the inner word no, which comes from the word on, which is almost like to annihilate, to get rid of, because it's bothering. Like a mosquito is, making somebody crazy. So they hate the mosquito. I remember I was once giving this example to a Jewish woman. So I said, you know how a mosquito comes, you want to kill it. She says, no, I hate killing anything. So it's like, wow, you can't give such an example to a kind Jewish woman. But I'm not so kind. Like mosquitoes, they bug me and I'm happy to kill them. So where does that come from? Because it's like bugging me, right? So, in fact, it says, I saw this in a Sefer, in a very interesting book from Rafal Khan, Yael Khan's father, that there are three levels of jealousy. The greatest jealousy that exists is from bad people to good people. And that's the jealousy of anti-Semitism, anti-America, anti-Israel. And therefore, every jealousy, it says in I forgot where it says it, but basically, if a person hates someone, because hatred is a form of jealousy, if a person hates someone because they did something to them. So let's say, I don't know, I stole, God forbid, $100 from you. So it's not so big. I can give you back the $100. Or I offended you. I can say, I'm sorry. So your hatred has a cause. And this is a very deep, deep, deep Torah, because when we say that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed from baseless hatred, what does that mean? It means jealousy. Because jealousy is a type of hatred that has no basis. I'm upset, and unfortunately, and this is a kind of very deep concept, which is a lot of people, certainly we're Jews, and we don't understand anti-Semitism. It doesn't make sense. But we know we don't hate anyone. We know that we love everyone. We know that we're the kindest people, right? Certainly objectively. So if that's the case, why would somebody hate us? To the extent of creating a Holocaust. I mean, that's a lot of hatred. You got to put a lot of effort. Nobody does anything unless they have a motive. So there's a big motive, a lot of hatred. The answer is, and we'll look at the Arabs and their hatred. I mean, it's crazy stuff going on in the world, even today. So the answer is that jealousy, and this is why I think a lot of people don't understand the dynamic, is because when we have a one-stage problem, let's say one thing, like God forbid, let's say I steal $100, so it's easy. I understand you're upset for that. But jealousy has a dual reality to it. What's the dual reality? That I'm only jealous if I'm arrogant. Where do you see this clearly? It says in the Ten Commandments not to be jealous. It's a very powerful statement to say, because we say the same Torah that says not to be jealous. The Talmud says we're jealous of everybody except for our child and our student. But there's a little secret that's brought down by the Rishonim. What does it mean not to be jealous? It says not to be jealous of your neighbor's wife. Let's say the person sees a beautiful woman, says, and if subconsciously I could have had that, right? It's like, but what if you have a different premise in life? And that is that, no, you couldn't have had it. You'll only be jealous of something that you believe you're entitled to. Where do you see this clearly? And this is what's brought down. For example, let's say, I don't know, I'm not going to give an example because the kings and the princes today are not such great examples, but a prince marries a princess. You don't say, I'm jealous of the princess. Why? I'm jealous of the prince that he has this princess. Why? Because you're not a prince. And so jealousy can only apply when a person sees themselves like children. The father's driving a car, the child doesn't get jealous because he knows he's not a father, he's not an adult. But give two 16-year-olds, one of them twins, one of them a car, go look what's going to happen. So jealousy is a very real thing, but it's based on a premise that's false, which is you are entitled to what the other person has. Everybody has their mission in this world, and nobody gets what the other person is meant to have. That's why it says, in fact, if a person is jealous, God forbid, God can take away from them what they have, because that's their thing. He has a nice field, he has a nice, that's his thing, and you have your thing. We all have our story. So this is a very important point, which is that where does the negative come from? So first of all, often it comes to low self-esteem, like we discussed, and low self-esteem creates arrogance, and the arrogance means that I deserve everything. So anything that anyone deserves, I become jealous of. And that's where the craziness comes. But the truth of the matter is that the real kind of truth of life is that we all have a mission. There's nobody that can take away your mission. In fact, the Rebbe says something very interesting. Many times in life, especially today when things are good, it's very easy for people, one of the big clippers in life is laziness. The Rebbe says that everything has good and bad in it. So, for example, when things are tranquil, when times are good, one hand is very good. It's a beautiful thing, right? We're wishing for the times of Mashiach, Yom Shekuli Shabbos, Menucha, Chayei Lamed. The other hand, there's something very bad with it, that a person can get lazy. In fact, they can become selfish. And I've said this before, that why is it in Israel that, let's say, when everything's good, okay, I'm into my thing, and there's an argument between the left and the right. The bombs fall, everybody's opening up their store, everybody come, free of charge, take food. Why? Because in the humility, suddenly all the shtusim, all the I goes away. In a way, a person has to be able, that's the Ba'at of the last Maimer of the Rebbe, the ideal thing in life is to have a positive I. That things are good, and you're making them good when things are good. Because it's not hard when things are bad to be good. Because that forces you into consciousness. I lived in South Africa for a while. The Jews in South Africa, especially Johannesburg, where it was rated like the most anxious city in the world because you had all these people, and unfortunately, after apartheid ended, which apartheid itself was an evil thing, but still there was like chaos. It's happening now a little bit in America. People don't mention this concept of reverse racism, where just because a person is black doesn't give an entitlement to steal. You still need law and order. In fact, most crime is black on black. Crime is not racist. They don't care. And the people they hurt most are the people that are closest to them. So it's a very, very false, this whole evil of getting rid of the police. If you actually look at the statistics, 80% of black people want more police because they're in the neighborhoods that need it. So the bottom line is that when you do see when people go through stress, certainly the Jews that, let's say, came to, they went through a Holocaust, even the state of Israel that we're in now was built by people that went through severe trauma, basically. And they had to flee. And I mean, it was also the Jews from the Arab countries. 800,000 Jews were expelled from their countries. And so what does this teach us? It teaches us in a certain sense that a person that goes through difficulty, suddenly the mind wakes up. Now this is a very important point because there's a sikha of the Rebbe where the Rebbe spoke after the Yartzah, not at the Yartzah, after, it was in the Shiva of the Rebbetzin, I think it was Parshas Tumah. If I'm not mistaken, it was in the Shiva. And it was very clear, I think the Rebbe, in fact, that week he made a will, that somehow the Rebbe associated that if the Rebbetzin passed away, maybe Gimel Tammuz would happen. And the Rebbe said very clearly in that Sikha that after Gimel Tammuz, there's a big tragedy that this didn't happen, that everything in Lubavitch has to be run through Rabbanim. If that happened, Lubavitch would be a much nicer place. But because the Das Torah, the Hashem's Das, Hashem's opinion comes through a basin. And so everything has to go through, and those people that, whatever, I don't want to speak negative, but that's clear. I saw it live video where the Rebbe said clearly. So after the Rebbe said that, Rabbi Marlow, who was one of the Rabbanim of the basin, came up to the Rebbe, and he understood what the Rebbe was saying. And he said something like the Rebbe, whatever, I don't know, about being Mashiach, or what it taking us to Mashiach. So the Rebbe said a very interesting thing. The Rebbe had a very unique ability to be infinitely high and infinitely low and infinitely practical. It's like when the Rebbe told Binyamin Netanyahu when he said that he was going to come into Israel, go into Pakistan, the Rebbe said it with a smile. Oh, you're going to have to fight with 19, the other 119 parliament members. So that was like, it's an amazing prophecy, amazing teaching. It's like everything is there in 1 second. He's giving him the whole. He says it with a smile. It's like not like, oh, you're going to have to, this is how it's going to have to be. So the Rebbe smiled. He says, without kosis. What's kosis? Kosis is the state where the oil comes out. Kosis is crushed. And it says a Jew doesn't give his oil. I can say it in my own life as well. A Jew doesn't give his oil, because we all have Shem within us. We all have true greatness. So the Rebbe said, so a Yid gives his oil. It says a Yid is like an olive. It only gives its oil when it's crushed. And so the Yid has tremendous insight. The Rebbe said that most, he didn't say most, I think he said all like transformations in the world come through Yiddish. You see it definitely, Einstein, even philosophy comes from Philo of Alexandria, who was a frum Yid. Most changes, I think, sometimes even for the bad, Karl Marx, these changes, these thought process changes come from Yiddish. So, in fact, the Alter Rebbe says an interesting thing, that a Yid, if he's good, he's very good, because I think that the Yid is connected to Hashem, and it's connected to something that's not in the box. We're not structured. There was my brother studied psychology. He told me that a psychologist, I think in England, a very brilliant man, that I could categorize every person into one of 160 categories, except for a Jew. A Jew can't be categorized. You see, every single Jew has got a philosophy. There's a whole philosophy going on. Says in Gemara, Shreichem Yisrael, that even the least of you is a philosopher. Every Jew has a complete Torah, complete philosophy. And it's not a bad thing because it means that he's thinking. But the question is, are you also doing? It's nice to think, but are you also doing? And where do we find action? Action we find when a person is squeezed. That's when a person gives their action. And you see it very clearly. I mentioned it. You see the immigrants that come to America, right? I just know this from America. I remember this guy. He was in our community in Kansas City. And he was a lawyer for a massive company, many factories. So they couldn't get American workers because the Americans don't want to work for $10 an hour. We're a factory worker. I'm not interested. But the Mexicans or the people that came over the border, they're only too happy. Oh, $10 an hour, I can work. So when a person goes through difficulty in life, they eventually learn how to, it brings out their oil. Now, the story is that, so I was saying about how that when a person is crushed, so the Rebbe said a very interesting thing to Rabbi. The Rebbe said without cusses. In other words, and I was there when the Rebbe was with us physically. Everybody, I remember one of my friends, he went around, he was like, he did a survey, why do you want Mashiach? And he asked anybody today, why do you want Mashiach? They'll give you 1,000 good reasons. But then, basically, it boiled down to one answer, because the Rebbe wants Mashiach. Why? Because if you're living with Mashiach, you don't have any questions. Like, imagine Mashiach is already here. You're going to say to somebody, why do you want Mashiach? What do you mean? Everything's good. So when you actually had the Rebbe with you on a physical level, it was like Mashiach totally. Like, I mean, any question you had, you could ask the Rebbe. The Rebbe was giving us encouragement, direction. Everything was beautiful. It was amazing. So, but the thing is, I think that we missed the point. And it's a very, very important point. And the point is that Mashiach is not about the Rebbe. In fact, the Rebbe, Mashiach is about us. Because the Rebbe doesn't need Mashiach. The Rebbe is already living at the level of Mashiach. It says by Reb Shem Bayachai, there was no destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. You know the famous story of Menachem of Vitebsk here, maybe it was here in Stas, in Tveria. Somebody announced that Mashiach came. He left his room and he smelled air. He said, no, Mashiach didn't come. He said, why did he have to leave his room? Because in his room, Mashiach was there. So by tzaddikim, great tzaddikim, there is no such thing as Golus. They don't see what's Golus. Golus is where I say, we don't see Hashem. They see Hashem. They know Hashem. It's only to us. So the question is, and that's why a person can, in a certain sense, get the Rebbe in a chitzonistic way. Because the nature of a human being, like we said before, is we see the world from an outside-in perspective. We see it in a chitzonistic way. We see things on the physical. Like the Rebbe said, a person could be in 770. They could see the Rebbe, but they didn't see the Rebbe. They didn't experience it. Because if you don't know that the Rebbe can be with you in Australia, just like he's with you in 770, you don't know who the Rebbe is. You don't understand. The Rebbe is a source soul, and a source soul is Etzem, is part of Hashem, and Hashem is everywhere. He's with you wherever you are. And like the famous story that a person once went to, he was imprisoned, and I think with the Rebbe, or maybe the Rebbe Nashab, and said, why didn't you say Rebbe? You could have called. So the scene, in fact, was a Farbrengen once, where the Rebbe, I think, after Farbrengen went white. He said, had somebody made a request for the Jews of Russia, they would have all been come out. So there's certain things that have to come, what we call Mamatla Maila. Hashem didn't make the world in a way for Hashem, He made it for us. So who's the one has to change? Or a good example of this is, let's say, your child. Let's say you want your child, I don't know, to become a mensch. Who has to become the mensch? The child. You can't become a mensch for your child. Your child has to become a mensch on his own. And so certain things in this world have to go through us. It's very interesting where the Rebbe says, the Rebbe was always super kind. Everything he said was the nicest possible way. So when the Rebbe says something a little harsh, you know that it's true. And the Rebbe says that when it comes to all the times, let's say the Matzah, when Jerusalem was surrounded, or this and that, these are called the Eish Ratzah. Special time. Why is it a special time? Because had they done Shuvah, had they gotten the message, Mashiach would have come. So in a certain sense, every moment is a Eis Ratzon, because and that's what the Rebbe was saying in that famous Sikha. Like if people took this really serious and they really did tshuva, they really understood this is what the world is about, then they can bring Mashiach, because this is it. So unfortunately, sometimes it's the tzaddis. It's like Shem said. First, I sent you Moshe Rabbeinu, I sent you the Nevi'im, and then I'll send you suffering, and then you'll wake up. You'll understand. No, this stuff is real. This is real stuff. So ultimately, of course, it's not about a negative situation. Hashem is positive. It's about a positive situation. So what is the positivity of the situation? It is that we ourselves realize what is true. And that's why life has to go through a certain stage of darkness, because there has to be a sense of myself. And there has to be a choice between right, left and right, truth and falsehood, light and dark. There has to be these choices. If you don't have these choices, then you can't choose. You can't choose unless you have choices. And so you have to have a situation where there are choices. And then the person, mamish, says, okay, this is the choice that I'm going to make. This is what's right. But, and this is a very important thought, we've mentioned this before, and it's very important to understand that often the way the mind thinks, like, I like the example of food. I eat something, I feel like the whole world is full, because I'm full. We think that, Rashi says, we think that other people think about us like we think about them. Right now I'm full, the whole world is full. No. And this was part of the greatness of the Rebbe, to understand what everybody else is lacking. Right? A person that's wealthy often doesn't understand what poverty is. I remember speaking about a donation from a very wealthy person, wealthy family. I was raising money for somebody in the community that needed some money. He's like, why can't his family help him? I thought, this guy's out of his mind. Like, what, you think that every single family are billionaires and you can call your brother and he just has to, dig into his bank account? So the point is, the person literally came from a very, very wealthy family. To his credit, when the state of Israel was founded and Golda Meir came to South Africa, his grandfather gave $50 million. You know what $50 million is then? It must have been worth, I don't know, who knows, like $500 million or $5 billion today for the state of Israel. So to the credit was, but you can see it was a super wealthy family. But he just didn't understand. He wasn't in the right mind. I've seen this. I mean, many Jews didn't start off that way. So they started off poor, so they understand what it means. But sometimes people that have, they don't even know what's going on. Like we gave the story before with a big tzaddik, the Rebbe, he says to person, come outside. In the cold, that's where I'm going to ask you for a donation for a person that needs heat. So the bottom line of life is that we were speaking before that everything is really about relationship. And a relationship is different to a structure. It's super important to understand. Why? Because a structure means that it exists. And this often, almost every time, every society tries to do this. What do they try to do? They try to perpetuate the structure that they have. And so the older generation tries to teach the younger generation the structure. Like I gave the example before, that there are these people in Alaska, and they've been building for thousands of years beautiful houses underground. And this is their culture. But the kids don't want to live underground. The kids want to live in a normal house with heating. And their whole culture is falling apart. Why? Because their culture isn't a real culture. It's based on something which depends on the time. So there's certain things that are, this is what the Frierdiker Rebbe said, there's certain laws that are constant. They don't depend on a certain, like for example, how fast you go down the highway. It depends if you have a horse and buggy or you have a car. It depends. So the speed limit's going to change. But if you don't have a horse and buggy in a car, and you're talking about relationships, it's a different kind of a structure. The structure is different. Because you can't make a rule that's going to be applicable to every situation. Now, the Rebbe says a relationship is a dynamic thing. If today your relationship is the same as yesterday, you don't have a good relationship. Relationship and everything in the world of truth goes through what we call the process of Rotzi V'Shuv. It has a certain moment of intensity, and then you leave the intensity, and you go back. And that's why a healthy, even relationship with Hashem, with ourselves, with the spouse, with everybody, it has to go in and out. Shem says a relationship is like a dance. The dance is like the Hasidic dances, they go in and out. There always has to be connection and disconnection. You always have to connect and disconnect. Because when you do that, you're able to have a better relationship every single time. The relationship is able to grow. So if we understand this, we understand that what are we really in? We're in many relationships. You're in the relationship of your own growth. And your own growth is an infinite process because you're always going to discover something new. You're always going to learn something new. And that's probably the deepest relationship we have. Let's say if you're in a marriage, you're in a relationship with a spouse. And that is also a dynamic relationship. Your relationship with your children, dynamic. Your relationship with Hashem, again, it's a dynamic relationship. We're always growing. All of our relationships are in a constant state of growth. And once we understand this, obviously there has to be a structure. And that's what the Torah gives us, a basic foundational structure. And interestingly enough, according to the Torah, you have to respect the law of the land. There has to be financial laws. There has to be structure. And the Torah says every country, apart from Israel, we can get all our civil laws from Hashem. Every country has to have civility. It has to have a legal system, one of the 7 Noahide laws. However, it's very important to understand that once you have this, you don't belong to a structure. The structure belongs to you. We are here, the structure, and that's what I was saying the other day. What's the difference between good and evil? Evil is always that the people have to serve the system, like communism. What is good is that the system is here to serve the people, but there has to be a system. But ultimately, the system is here to help every individual grow. So this is what Hashem really has done. He's created a system, and now we have to appreciate what we have, because the first 2,000 years was barbarism and savagery, and it still goes on in certain Arabic countries and African countries where it's just a balance of power. Like that's why if you take away a dictator, big mistake that the U.S. did, you go out and take away a dictator from, there's a saying, a savage nation is a savage leader. You take away, let's say, the dictator of Syria, they'll kill each other. People don't know in China, the best thing for them is a dictator. The Chinese, 2,000 years ago, killed 300 million. Even not that long ago, there were a bunch of fiefdoms killing each other. The best thing you could do for the Chinese is have a powerful dictatorship. The best thing. It's actually a Muslim saying, I don't know, they said better 1,000 years of tyranny than one day of anarchy. And it's true, because if you took away the government, and one day there'd be riots and murders and this and that. And this is a fact. You saw this in there's a Yid that he was a philosopher. His parents always spoke to him about the importance of law and order. And one day, you can look this up, the Montreal police went on strike. That day there were bank robberies, there were murders, there was this, and then one day everybody had to hide in their home. Just one day. And these are civilized people now. And one day. So, Torah knows exactly what it's telling us about. It says always pray for the peace of the government, even a bad government, because in its thing you'll have peace. So we have to respect on a global level. It's a very big mistake to overthrow. What Obama did was very evil, because he went around overthrowing the government of Libya and the little government of different governments. And what do they have there now? Disaster, Shabbat disaster, Shabbat disaster. And because certainly people that don't understand law and order need law and order, and whether people like it or not, the fact is that Russia also needs a dictator. They need it, and if you take it away, they'll mamish. Even now they're going. If you know what goes on, there's a mafia. There's people that My brother-in-law was in Ukraine, so I asked him how's the police force. So he says it depends which mafia runs it. A good mafia makes sure that the structure, but everything works in a mafia. You have an apartment, the mafia, you have to pay the mafia this, and they make sure you get your rent. 20% of your building is going to the mafia. So it's like a structure, like you want to change money, or it's illegal to change money, except if you did it through the president's son, 10% goes to him of your exchange rate. So it's like the whole thing is corrupt, but still you need some kind of, you need a structure. Anyway, hopefully that the structure is not a corrupt structure. It's a structure based on Torah, the 7 Noahide laws, and it's a good structure. But the ultimate is that a person has to realize that we are in, like the 13 petaled rose, there are many relationships. We're in relationships. I'm in a relationship with myself, and I'm always going to grow. I'm in a relationship with you, and we're going to grow. I'm in a relationship with my spouse. We're all in a relationship. And once we understand, even with Hashem is not some kind of, God forbid, dictator. He's in a relationship. He's there. He's with us. He's helping us grow. And because he's infinite, he's in a relationship with everyone and everything. And once we understand this, we understand how far the world has come. When the Rebbe says Mashiach is here, it really is. Look how amazing the world is relative to all of human history. We're like unbelievable Mashiach time. We're just going to conclude with a story, a beautiful story. Many of the Yidden from Russia, they were brought up in atheism. It was difficult for them to, even though they were very fine Jews, and in the Midas Taivais, when he came to America, he says, you should know who's saying this, the son of who's saying this. He says, I'm not worried about the Bnei Chassidim that are not keeping Shabbos and Taras Mishpacha, because the Midas Taivais of the Avos HaKadoshim are in them, the good character traits of their holy ancestors, and when Mashiach comes, will easily amalgamate. Mashiach doesn't have to deal with certain people that their Midas are not so beautiful. So, but be that as it may, the story is like this. I met a guy, my grandmother had a food pantry in Cleveland, Ohio. This guy's name was Dr. Goldberg, and he was a unique person from Russia. I actually never met a Yid like him from Russia. He was a happy guy. A lot of them went through a lot of suffering, and he was like very, kind of like an open-minded. He was a smart guy, a doctor. He was like very open, and he was also a big believer in Hashem. He was like very spiritual person. It was very unique to meet a Jew from Russia like that. He told me that he was in World War II, and the Russians, to their credit, maybe they did it because they had to, but they rescued Auschwitz. They were the ones that came in. So he was the doctor that came into Auschwitz. He was on the Russian army. And there in Auschwitz, he found the Siddur. And he came back home, and he had the Siddur. This guy, Dr. Goldberg, told me that he thought that Judaism had died. Why? Because in Russia, they closed it down, literally. He didn't see very, very few secret places, but if you're an average Jew, you would have any association to Orthodox Judaism or Judaism at all. In Europe, he went to Europe. He thought they were wiped out, right? He went, he saw the destruction, and Russia was very good at kind of protecting its citizens from true information. They would have articles like Judaism is dead, and in Russia, the propaganda was amazing. I know a Yidel, who was actually a captain in the Russian army. He told me that there was a lady, a Jewish woman, that when Stalin died, she died of grief. That's how good the propaganda was. This guy that murdered so many Yidden people, even a chassid, there's a book, Samarkand, where a chassid said, when Stalin died, there was one guy that was standing up for us. The propaganda was unbelievable. There's a guy that, I told you about this book, Disinformation. He's a top Soviet general to defect to the West, 2-star general. The first introduction of his book is if you understand this, you understand Russia, every premier of Russia, he does the same thing. He uses the propaganda to aggrandize himself, like he's the guy. But everybody believes it because there's no other information. So, the story is that Dr. Goldberg thought Yiddishkeit was over. And he goes 70 years after the communists, created themselves, and unfortunately there are many Jews who actually founded it. Jewish people can go we see now with crazy liberal brainwashing, they can get crazy ideas, even become anti-Semite. So make a long story short, Sexia, they were the main people that were against the Orthodox Jews. That killed many people were these kind of radical young Jews. So the bottom line is, and it didn't help them because unfortunately the radicalism that they create always becomes anti-Semitic, like we see it in America now. It goes against them. So I realize radicalism is a cancer. It's not the solution. So he said like this: after 70 years, he comes to Cleveland. They let the Jews out, and he sees a Jew walking with a talus. So he follows him. It's the first time in 70 years he saw a Jew in a talus. And he walks, the Jew goes into a synagogue, and he looks around, and he doesn't see police. Synagogue, talus, no police. So he told me, you're telling me Mashiach is here? I know Mashiach is here. So we're living in like this child that everything is good. He doesn't even realize what he has. But here's a Jew that saw the destruction of Judaism in Russia, saw literally the murder of Jews in Poland, and he thought that it's over. And he comes and he realizes actually it's alive and well. It's doing well. And this is the main message that the Rebbe is trying to teach us. That God is alive and well, Life is alive and well. Everything is good. It's amazing. It's never been so good in human history. It's true there's a little bit of craziness, but a little bit of craziness compared to a world of craziness, that's a miracle. The world is doing amazing. So our job is just to keep on the positive news, shut off the negative news, know that it's everything Hashem is leading us. Literally hopefully this Pesach we're going to be in the Beis HaMikdash with the Rebbe, with all the tzaddikim, the Chaim v'levracha.